Nosso assunto agora é empreendedorismo. O empreendedor sempre foi responsável por grandes mudanças, grandes transformações. Hoje em dia, com o boom de startups e aceleradoras, mais e mais pessoas estão sendo capazes de transformar ideias em realidade e de traduzir criatividade em inovação. Além disso, uma preocupação coletiva com o impacto tem moldado comportamentos individuais. O papel fundamental do empreendedorismo é promover benefícios em vários âmbitos através de soluções inovadoras. Não importa a velocidade com que se anda, mas sim ir sempre em frente. O valor e a força em idealizar, coordenar, realizar, implementar, mudar, evoluir, agir. Se o caminho se faz ao caminhar, sigamos as pegadas do empreendedorismo. Ele é cofundador do Waze, que é um dos maiores aplicativos de base comunitária de tráfego e navegação do mundo, e que foi adquirido pelo Google em junho de 2013 pelo surpreendente valor de 1 bilhão e 100 milhões de dólares. Com vocês, o empreendedor em série e mentor de jovens empreendedores, Uri Levine.
Good morning. I'm always excited to come to Brazil because this is one of the places that Waze made the biggest impact. And just for a second, I want you to imagine yourself driving 10 years ago without Waze, right? And yesterday I arrived from the airport, and Waze told me that it's going to take 1 hour and 20 minutes to get to the hotel, which is quite normal. Actually, it was actually pretty good relative to the traffic jams that we have here. But that was actually accurate on the minute. And I think that this is one of the most important impact of Waze that you can actually plan.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Thank you. You can plan. You can figure out how long it will take you to get from here to wherever you want to go. And this is very, very important for the economy, that you can actually build one of the key cornerstones of the businesses, and this is transportation, right, or mobility. As you know, we sold Waze in 2013, and I left. The day after the acquisition, I left so I can build more startups. And turns out that many of them ended up to be pretty successful here in the local market, right? So you think of Move It, which is like Waze but for public transportation, 25 million users of Waze actually in Brazil. So making even a bigger impact. And by the way, if we're thinking of mobility, then public transportation is even more important than driving. And what I do is I build startups, and what I would like to share with you this morning is a little bit the story of Waze and the story of entrepreneurs, and then the passion for a change. And at the end of the day, it is up to the entrepreneurs to go and change the world. These are the ones that are actually going to take something and look at it from a different perspective, a very different perspective that might change things dramatically. Because if you start to think about it, then you ask yourself, okay, you look at all the big companies in the world today, and you look at Google and Amazon and Facebook, and not that long time ago, they were actually startups. In some cases, it's about decades. Some other cases, it's 20 years. This is it, right? So Amazon is about 22 years old. This is it. And change the world completely. It's always entrepreneurs that will try a completely different approach. And if they are successful, then the impact is going to be dramatic. So entrepreneurship in general starts with, so I need a realignment of the mic. Okay, is that better now? Yes. Okay. The only problem is that I have to hold that throughout the entire presentation, but this is what we'll do. So entrepreneurship in general, they start with usually a dream and a very, very strong emotion that leads into a passion and building the dream. And immediately after that, there is a realization that if you're gonna go through this journey, this is gonna be a roller coaster journey, right? There are ups and downs and ups and downs. And everyone that built a business before will tell you that, okay, there are in every business, there are ups and downs, but the frequency of them in building a startups are much more rapid. So they could be twice a day that you'll be going up and down. And I can quote here Ben Horowitz, one of the largest venture capitals in the US, Andreessen Horowitz. Ben Horowitz used to be a CEO of a startup. And one day he was asked whether or not he was sleeping well at night as a CEO. And he said, oh yeah, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. And this is really the journey of a startup. And at the same time, for an entrepreneur, there is no doubt what's next. It's always the next startup. If you would ask an entrepreneur, okay, so you're gonna build this startup, and after that, what are you going to do? They will tell you, I'm gonna build another startup. And then if you would ask them, this next startup of yours, what it's all about, they actually know. So we launched Waze in 2009. We started in 2007, but we only launched the product in 2009. And by the time we did that, I already knew that my next startup is going to deal with financial fees. And I only built that in 2013. And when I built that, I already knew that I'm going to build one that deals with going to the mechanic, this is ANG, and one that deals with airfare, this is Fairfly. And many of those, I dream about them for years before I actually get to figure out when exactly to build them. So I want you to think of going and building a startup exactly like falling in love, right? So there are many ideas that you think of, and eventually there is one idea that you tell yourself, this is the one, right? Or you go to many dates, and eventually there is one date that you say, she is the one, right? And at the beginning, you don't want to see anyone else, just your date, right? You don't want to listen to the word, you don't care about anything else, or you're only thinking about your new idea, your new concept, until you feel confident enough and you go and tell your friends about your idea. And usually they will tell you that will never work, right? Or this is the stupidest idea that I ever heard. And by the way, I heard that with Waze and with many others. Or you take your date for the first time to meet your friends and they're telling you, she's not for you, right? This is where exactly you disengage from your friends. You don't listen to them. So the good news is that you don't listen to them and you go and build your startup. The bad news is that you don't listen to them and maybe they had something smart to tell you. You actually need to be in love in order to go and try to change the world, because otherwise the journey is a roller coaster and it's very complex and very likely that you will give up throughout the journey. Now, the journey itself is a very long, and in particular, the longest part of the journey is the one that there is no traction, right? So you build it and you think that now it's going to work, and it ends up that it's not. Or you start to bring the first users and you believe that now it's going to be easy, and it's not. And each one of them is like crossing a desert, right? So imagine that you are in the middle of the desert and there's only sand around you, right? And you walk all day and there is still only sand around you, right? And you keep on walking, and every day you're making a very, very small progress. But when you add all of those together, it's starting to look like a major progress. So there are two things that you don't want to happen while you're in the middle of the desert.
you don't want to change directions, because then you might end up going up in circles rather than crossing through the desert. And the other part is that you don't want to run out of fuel. This is where fuel turns out to be very, very expensive, right? So if you, in a startup world, if you have no traction and you run out of funding, this is where it's going to be very painful and very expensive. Now, the journey itself is a journey of failures, right? So, and this is very critical to understand, because you know, we try to change the world, right? We're trying to do something that no one did before. And so even though that we believe that we know exactly what to do, we don't. And so we try. And we try one thing and it doesn't work, and we try different things and it doesn't work, and we keep on trying different things until we find one thing that does work, right? Now this by itself just buys us the ticket for the next part of the journey, right? So if initially the first part of the journey will be around product market fit, then the next part of the journey will be around, so how do I scale? How do I go global? How do I make money out of that? And each one of them is a journey of failures. So if you're afraid to fail, then in reality, you already failed, because you're not going to take this journey. You're not going to even give it a try. And it's very easy to be afraid of failing. Actually, this is one of the challenges that we have in many environments, that people are afraid to fail. And when they are afraid to fail, they're not willing to take the risk. And we are not willing to take the risk, then we simply don't have enough entrepreneurs. We simply don't have enough people that are willing to try something completely different. In particular, when you think about governments and large organizations, no one is going to fire you if you make the obvious decisions, right? If you don't do anything dramatically changes, no one is going to fire you for that. But if you try something completely new and you fail, very likely that you'll get fired. But if you don't try something completely new, then the ability to make bigger impact is small. Now, Albert Einstein used to say that if you haven't failed, that's because you haven't tried anything new before. And the reality is that if you're going to try new things, you will fail. And the most important part is that how to get up from those failures and keep on moving forward, right? Because there will be plenty of those. Now, the other part of journey of failure is that we're going to celebrate a lot of things, right? So if you imagine the budget of a startup, then we will have, the most significant part will be the human resources, and then marketing and operation, and then we need to have budget for caipirinha. And this is very important, because we are going to celebrate many things, right? So we're going to celebrate the first user and the first version and the first time that they write on us on the paper. And everything that happens the first time, we're going to celebrate. Much better than that, if someone is suing you for patent infringements, that means that someone cares. That means that someone thinks that what we are doing is important enough, so it's worthwhile to stop us. Now, the best is when people start to thank you for what you have done for them. Then you know that you're actually creating value. And there is no bigger reward for entrepreneurs except the fact that they're knowing that they're creating value. Now, the first year, and this is the first year of a project, this is critical. And it's critical because what you discover and what you are learning on the first year is the one that is going to set the entire directions of the company, right? So there are a few things that we need to remember. Number one, product market fit. This is where you figure out what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve. This is where you can encapsulate the problem, the users, and building up the solution. But another thing that happens on the first year, and this is true for a startup, but it's also true to any new project that you will start, you're building the DNA of the company. And you can actually choose what kind of DNA you are building. Entire organization will have a DNA after the first year. Now, whether or not this is the one that you choose or the one that ended up with, it's up to you to decide. And when we started Waze, we say that Waze is going to be the best working place we ever had. And we define to ourselves, what does it mean? What kind of people we're going to bring on board? And we told that to the people that we hire, that we believe in that. And if you don't fit into this organization, then you should go someplace else, that it does fit your own agenda. But when you start to realize that this is what you're trying to do, we ended up with the best working place we ever had. So if I need to define just for a second how simple this journey is, it's very simple. You start with a problem. You find a problem, a big problem, something that it's worth solving, that the world is going to be a better place if you address that. And then you ask yourself, okay, so who has this problem? Now, if you end up with being the only person on the planet that actually have this problem, then I would recommend to go to a shrink. This is going to be much cheaper than building a startup, right? But if a lot of people have this problem, then what you need to do next is to understand their perception of the problem. And in order to do that, you actually need to speak with those people that you believe that they actually have this problem. And you start to understand how do they perceive the problem. And only then you go and build a solution. Now, if you're not going to follow this path, you might end up with building a solution that now is looking for a problem. And in many cases, you build an amazing technological solution that no one cares. Now, if no one cares, then no one cares. Then you will end up with now a solution that is looking for a problem. Now, building unicorn is very, very different. Unicorn in the startup scene is a billion-dollar company. And really, in order to do that, you need to figure out a few elements, right? So you need to figure out that there is value to the product, right? So there is a product market fit, that the market is large, that you can figure out the lifetime value, right? So what is the value for a single user, and this value is significant enough. And how do you go global and grow, right? And then sometimes there is additional X factor to it, which is a coolness. Now, the only problem is that you need to align all these stars in one line. The problem is that when you start, they're completely misaligned, right? And so you start with product market fit and you try to figure out, okay, so how do I create value to a single user, right? And you figure that out and it takes you maybe a year or a year and a half. And then you go and figure out the next part of the journey, right? So let's figure out that how do I grow, or how do I go global, or how do I bring more users, right? And while you are doing that, you need to make sure that product market fit is still valid, right? So on one hand, you're holding the product market fit in place, right? Just imagine that I'm putting my hand back on top and holding that star right there. And with the other hand, you're trying to bring another star to align, right? And then you figure out that actually I need more hands that I have. And this is really the challenge of a startup. Now, if everything is aligning, it will take you usually 7 years, maybe more, to figure that out. And in most cases, it's not the case. In most cases, you'll figure out that you can align one or two of them, but not all of them. So these turns out to be maybe the most important part for building a startup. So understand who the users are and what's their perception of the problem. And if you fail to do that, you're going to build something that no one cares. Making the mistakes fast, right? For me, product development starts after you launch. Now, the reason is that you're only going to learn faster. And when you learn faster, when you get feedbacks from users, this is your chance to actually move faster than the competition. And this is critical, right? Make the mistakes fast so you can fail faster, correct them faster, and eventually move faster than the entire industry. Good enough is going to win the market. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be good enough. The DNA and the mission defines the journey. The last one is actually very interesting. I ended up with speaking with a lot of entrepreneurs that their startup failed. And I think I spoke with maybe 25 of them. And I asked them why, right? And half of them said the team was not right. So I kept on asking, so what do you mean the team is not right? And so some of them told me, okay, we had this guy responsible for development and he was not good enough, or this guy responsible for marketing and was not good enough. So not good enough was one reason. And then another major reason, they told me we had communication issues, and what I called actually ego management issues, right? And these were the two main reasons. And then I asked the CEO, when did you know that the team is not right? And all of them knew within the first month. All of them knew within the first month that the team is not right. So the problem was not that the team was not right. The problem was that the CEO did not make the hard decision. Now, making easy decisions is easy. Making hard decisions is hard. And this is why most of the people don't want to make the hard decisions, right? So they will go all the way to the top in order to make the hard decision. Now, if the CEO doesn't make the hard decisions, there are only two options, right? So you are a member of the team, you know that the team is not right, right? If the CEO knew within a month that the team is not right, then everyone knew that the team is not right. It's not something that you can hide. And so everyone look at the CEO, waiting for the CEO to make the right decision, and the CEO doesn't make that decision, right? There are only two options. Number one, CEO doesn't know, which means that CEO is stupid. This is not good. Number two, CEO does know, and still don't make the hard decisions. That's actually even worse. The CEO lacks the leadership of making hard decisions. In both cases, the results are always the same. The top performer people would leave. Now, they would leave because they don't want to be in an organization that is unable to make hard decisions, and they would leave because they have a choice. Now, this is the beginning of the end of any organizations, right? If you have an organization that is unable to make hard decisions and the top performers are leaving, this is the beginning of the end. Sometimes you're looking at the challenge of raising capitals, and this turns out to be one of the biggest challenges for all the startups. And this is very interesting because about a year ago, I went to one of the largest venture capitals in Israel and asked them, how long does it take you to decide if you like the entrepreneur or not? And so the guy was looking at me and asked me, okay, do you want the real answer or do you want the right answer? And I said, I want the real answer. And he told me, before they sit down, right? Seconds. Now, we think about it as this doesn't make sense, right? So how long does it take us to decide if we are interviewing a person, a candidate, how long does it take us to decide that we like this candidate or not? How long does it take us to decide that we like a date or not? It's always seconds. And then we allow ourselves a little bit more time to either let that first impression sink or change that. And so therefore, you always have to start with the strongest point at the beginning, whatever it is. If this is the size of the problem, then it is the size of the problem. If this is the traction that you have, the team that you have built, whatever it is, you start with the strongest point at the beginning. So a little bit about the Waze story, and then behind Waze there is major magic. And part of it is because when we started, there was nothing there. The magic of Waze is that Waze itself, or the drivers, we the drivers, are building not only the traffic information, but also the map. And so this was the map of Tel Aviv when we started, blank page. There was absolutely nothing on the map. And this is exactly when I told other people that how it's going to work. They told me that will never work, all right? And so when the first driver drove, we collected the GPS data from the device. And if we will take this GPS data and draw that on the blank page, this is what we're going to get. Now, if I'm going to take that from a lot of drivers, I'm starting to get something that looks like a map, right? If I will tell you that this is a traffic circle in the middle, it looks like a traffic circle, and it is a traffic circle. And you can tell the difference between a main road and a street. And if there is an intersection that no one making a left turn, then no left turn is allowed, right? If there is a road that there are 100 people going into one direction and no one else coming the other direction, that will be one-way straight, right? If there is a road that there are 100 people going into one direction and only 2 coming the other direction, that will be one-way straight in Tel Aviv. Now, if you had a computer science background, if I can describe something, we can build it. And I just described how to take the data and build a map out of that, and this is exactly what we did. We built a system that takes all of this data and creates the map. Now, at this phase, the map is incomplete, but then we enabled map editing tools to allow people to provide us with street names and house numbers and points of interest to make the map complete. At this phase, if we will have someone that is driving slow, then we can actually figure out that there is a traffic jam here. And if we have a lot of drivers all over, then we can figure out where all traffic jams are and start to route people to avoid them. And this is really the magic of Waze. We started with a blank page, and we, the drivers, are creating all the data that is being used by the application. Now, is that really working? Actually, it turns out that it's working beautifully. Let me try that. So what we are seeing in this video is how the map was created in a few places in Eastern Europe. And you can see the date, beginning of 2010, and it took about maybe 6 months for the map to become good enough. That this is critical because we already established the underlying assumption that good enough and free wins the market. And this is exactly what happened. By the way, it will zoom in into the center area, and then it's easier to see. And it actually took about 6 months for the map to become good enough. Now, this is critical. By the way, if you drive someplace that no one drove before, then your avatar on the application will change into a roller steamer, and you pave the road as you drive. And this road will be available for everyone else the next morning using the Waze application. And this is really the magic of Waze. Now, the journey itself was much more complex than it looks like. We actually started in 2007. And we built the first version of Waze running on a PDA. Remember? Long time ago, there were dinosaurs, and then PDAs, and then Nokia phones, and today we all have iPhones and Android phones, right? This long time ago is 10 years. This is how fast things are changing in this space, right? 10 years, this is it. iPhone X is 10 years old. iPhone is 10 years old. Facebook is a little bit older. Twitter is less. Uber is less, right? Anyone here uses Uber? Right? Nearly everyone, right? This is less than 10 years old. And this is scary, by the way. You start to ask yourself, okay, so this is what happened in the last decade. By the way, if I will have a time machine and I will send you back 10 years, I'm not sure that you'll survive, right? No Facebook, no iPhone, no Uber, no Waze, so many things that you don't have. Not sure that you'll survive. Now let me try something completely different. How the future is going to change. The pace of innovation is actually increasing, right? So the next 10 years is going to be even more dramatic than the last one. In fact, you look at the top 10 companies in the world, right? Google and Amazon and Facebook, and you ask yourself, so how many of them are going to survive the next decade? How many of them are still going to be in the top 10 companies in the world? And only 5 of them will. Now, we don't know which one, because if we would know, we will sell short on the 5 that are not. The more interesting part is that who is going to replace them in the top 10 list? And some of those do not even exist today. Some of them are going to make such a dramatic change in the next decade that they do not even exist today. So we launched the product in 2009, beginning of 2009, and then it was actually, we launched that in Israel, turns out to be working beautifully, and we decided that, you know, this concept can work everywhere, so let's go everywhere. Remember this slide, lack of traction? This is what we have experienced in 2010. It was simply not good enough, right? So it was actually okay in a few places in Eastern Europe, and it was okay in Ecuador. But in most of the major markets, it was not good enough. And so this is what happens, right? You see that it's not working. You go and speak with drivers. You collect the feedback from them. You understand what doesn't work. You go and build the next version that solves everything. And you know that this is it, and it's not. And you go iteration after iteration after iteration, and every time you are 100% sure that this is it. And every time, again and again and again, it's not. And it took us the whole year of iterations to figure that out, until only in 2011 we have started to see the growth coming up, right? And all of a sudden it became good enough in Los Angeles, and then San Francisco, and New York, and Chicago, and one metropolitan after that are in the US. And in Europe, that was Italy first, and then Netherlands, and France, and Spain, and Sweden, and one country after the other. In Latin America, it was actually Chile first, and then Colombia, and Costa Rica, and Brazil, and Mexico, and one country after the other. Now, this is 2011, right? There is no one in this room that was using Waze before 2011. It was simply not good enough. If you would try, you'll give up on that very, very soon after you'll give it the first try. And it took us a longer period of time to figure that out. Now, in 2012, Waze was actually growing faster than the entire navigation industry combined. And you take all the navigation apps and navigation devices and in-car navigation system, Waze growing faster than all of them combined. 2013, Google came with the approach to acquire us, and we simply said yes. They came with the right offering, and we simply said yes. And part of the offering was that Waze will remain trying to address the same problem that we did from the beginning, to help drivers to avoid traffic jams, so figure out the fastest route to their destination. And I left. The day after the acquisition, I left. Now, I want to speak a little bit about disruption, because in many cases, this is how markets are going to change. A lot of times we speak about disruptive technology, but technology by itself does not disrupt. No one cares about the technology. Disruption is about changing the way we are doing things, right? Whether or not the way we are doing business or the way that we are behaving. And in many cases, you'll do that not through the technology. So maybe it's a new product that is being introduced, which is a derivative of a new technology. Maybe it's a new price. So Waze was free, right? Gmail was the first email to be free, right? Now, when you figure that out and you ask yourself, okay, there is no one that is going to win good enough and free, right? But if you're the first one to become free, you actually disrupt the entire market. No one else can charge money for something that you provide for free. And this is a major change. Maybe it's about changing the business model. Maybe it's about changing the knowledge, right? So it's not necessarily about technology, because if you will tell me it's about technology, then I would ask you, okay, what is the great technology behind Uber? And there isn't great technology behind Uber. It's simply introducing knowledge that was not available to the demand and supply side. Now, disruptors are always newcomers. They are the ones that have nothing to lose. They are the ones that are actually willing to take the risk because they have nothing to lose. Now, in many cases, we kind of explain to ourselves that, okay, it makes sense, right? Existing organizations, they have revenues, and if they will change the business model, then maybe they will not going to meet the expectation of the next quarter. This is not the reason. In order to change, in order to disrupt, we need, first of all, to tell ourselves that what we are currently doing is wrong. Now, as individuals, we have a hard time to tell ourselves that we are wrong, right? Now, just imagine how hard it is for organizations. Usually impossible. So when organizations want to disrupt, they cannot do that within. If they would try to do that within, it's going to be too late. They can only do that by engaging and investing in other organizations or new organizational startups that are going to disrupt their own market. Some markets that are calling for disruptions, right, where information is asymmetric, so do not exist. A market with a middleman. A middleman is a cover-up for inefficiency of the market, right? If we need a middleman in the market, that means that information is not flowing. Price, very different than the value. Regulations that don't work, right? You know, when you travel to Europe and buy goods, you're entitled to get the VAT back. 95% of the cases people fail. By the way, this is one of my newest startups that deal with that, and I have plenty of those. Now, this is very important to look at the disrupted point of view, right? Because sometimes we ask ourselves, how can they not see that coming, right? So here is the CEO of Netflix going into the office of the CEO of Blockbuster and ask him to acquire them. And he said no, twice, right? This happened twice in 2 different occasions. Now we know what happened to Blockbuster since then, and we know what happened to Netflix since then, right? Microsoft about the iPhone, that will never take off, right? Digital camera, right? This is rather old, but who invented the digital camera? That was actually Kodak that did, in their lab. And they called the CEO to show him what they just built. And he said, shh, don't tell anyone, right? You cannot prevent the revolution, right? Yahoo and Google, right? So Google, for a limited period of time, was actually the search engine for Yahoo. And this is 1996 or 1997, and they ran out of cash, and they asked Yahoo to acquire them for $2 million. And Yahoo said no. Now, we don't know, this is, by the way, very, very important. We don't know what would have happened if they would, right? It's not that okay, they missed an opportunity. We don't know if they missed opportunity. But the reality is that it's very easy to overlook opportunities like that or to miss revolutions, because right now, your current trajectory is that there is no revolutions. We always, the human being and the humankind always fail to see the revolutions. And we will keep on failing that. Now, the other side of disruption is that disruption is good, right? If we define disruption by changing market equilibrium, then the new equilibrium, by definition, is much better than the previous one. Otherwise, the market will not go there, right? And so we should embrace changes like that because the new market is better. You look at Uber today, and there are 10 times more on-demand trips than there were 10 years ago. 10 times more. The market is 10 times bigger. Different distribution, right? But 10 times bigger and much cheaper price. Right, so we look at it from the market perspective, from the user perspective, from the overall revenues being generated in the market, it's all goodness, except the existing players in the market that failed to go through the revolution. We can look at the car industry as a model, right? The car industry is an industry that was not changed in the last 100 years, right? 100 years ago, the most sellable car in the world was Ford, and it was black, and it was doing about 16 miles per gallon. And last year in the US, it was Ford, and it was black, and it was doing about 17 miles per gallon. So not a lot of changes. But in reality, we drive cars today the same way that our parents did, in the same way that generation before that did. We go into the driver's seat, we have steering wheel, we have pedals, and we drive the cars ourselves. Now, this is going to change. Just imagine that there are cars that can be drive by themselves autonomously, right? You can actually call the car shows up, take you wherever you want to go, and then you get out of the car and the car disappears, right? You click on this clicker and the car shows up. And you click on the clicker again and the car disappears, right? Now, if this is the case, I don't need to own a car. I need to own a clicker. And maybe I will need to have a big clicker for a big car and a red clicker for a red car and different kinds of clickers, but I don't need to own a car. So the business model will change, right? We as consumers are going to consume mobility as a service and not buying a product. Now, if you're a car maker and you believe you will keep on selling the same number of cars that you're doing today and you do not adapt to a new business model, you will be out of business. If you're selling car insurance, and this is based on number of cars and not based on the mileage being driven, you will be out of business. If you have driving school, look for a new job. Look, I have 5 children, right? The youngest one starting to drive these days, right? And they're all driving. The next generation, they will not drive. They will not even have a driver license. The generation after that, if we will tell them that we used to drive cars ourselves, they will not believe us. Now, it seems odd, right? So here's a story. I was in elementary school, and one day I asked my dad to drive me to school, right? So this is maybe 45 years ago. And he said, this is 400 meters, walk there, right? And I asked him to drive me to school again and again, and he said, you know what? When I was your age, I used to get to school on a donkey. And I did not believe him. 2 generations from now, they will not believe us that we used to drive cars ourselves. So this is actually quite new. This is from a couple of weeks ago when I discussed with an investor in Israel, one of my startups, and he said, but the CEO is not coming from the industry. And I said, okay, hold that thought, right? So we both have enough experience in building teams and choosing up CEOs. What are the most important things that we are looking at the CEO? And when we start to list them, right? So someone that will never give up and that the team will follow that person and making hard decisions, right? And listen to the customers, which is critical, right? Because if you don't listen, you build something that no one cares. And build strong teams and so different things that we expect to see at the CEO. And then we completed the list and asked them, where exactly coming from the industry is on that list? And it's not. And this is very, very important things to understand. We want someone that understands the problem, but not necessarily understand the industry. In fact, we started Waze, the biggest mapping and the biggest traffic company in the world. No one came with an experience in this space. Right? We started FIEX that deals with financial fees. No one coming from the financial world. We built Moveit with no one coming from mobility or public transportation. Many of those startups, people are not necessarily from the industry. They understand the problem, they understand the consumers, and they have those capabilities, but not necessarily the experience that we're building throughout being in an industry. And this is critical to remember, right? If you are in an existing industry for decades, then it's not that you're going to change your point of view in a matter of seconds. If you're coming from the outside, you don't have a point of view. So a few words about myself. I build startups. This is what I do. I usually start about 2 or 3 every year. And they're focused on the same philosophy, right? Doing good and doing well. Right? I'm looking for big problems that are worth solving, and then I will try to address them. So Waze, we all know Waze. Moveit, like Waze, but for public transportation, actually answering the same question that Waze does. How do I get from here to wherever I want to go right now, but using public transportation? By the way, the future of urban mobility is public transportation. There's simply not enough roads to provide enough service to all the cars. You know, you look at the globe from the outside, from the outer space, right? And you ask yourself, okay, so there are the water bodies and continents and land and so forth, and there are man-made stuff, right? When you look from the outer space, 1/3 of the man-made stuff is roads. 1/3 is housing, and another third is actually parking. We simply don't have enough roads. FIEX deals with the biggest secret in the world, financial fees. In the US alone, there are $600 billion of financial fees every year. 600 billion. Now, the scary part is that people don't even know that they're paying them. And when I was young, my dad once told me that if you don't know how much you're paying, then you're paying too much. And this is the reality, right? Now, we don't think about it as a lot, right? But I want you just for a second to imagine your retirement plan and that you're paying maybe 1% a year financial fees on that. It's not a lot, right? 1% doesn't sound like a lot. Year after year after year, the compound effect of that is 1/3 of your lifetime saving. So this is your retirement, and 1/3 of it you paid in fees. Rumor is a marketplace for non-refundable hotel reservation. So just imagine that you make travel plans and you make hotel reservation and you change your plans and you get stuck with reservations that you cannot use. Simply sell that reservation to someone else. Zik is another marketplace for store credit. So imagine that you return something to the store and you have this store credit that you can use within the chain. Turns out that 30% of those never being used. Now these 30% is $100 billion a year, $100 billion a year of real money that goes down the drain. Angie deals with the frustrations of going to the mechanic. You know, if I will take my car to the mechanic, whatever they'll say, I'll say okay, because I have no idea, right? So if they will tell me that I need to replace the carburetor in my car, I will say, okay, go ahead and replace that. Now, the only problem is that there is no carburetor in my car. What Angie does is an app running on the smartphones, connects to the car computer, doing the diagnostics for you, telling you what's wrong, and then asking mechanics around you to quote to repair that. So really empower the driver not only with the knowledge of what's going on, but also with the ability to do price comparison. And there is nothing more effective than price comparison to keep everyone honest. Now, by the way, this is you can use that here in Brazil, and it turns out to have pretty dramatic results, right? So the price quotes that you will get are so dramatically different that you wouldn't believe that. Fairfly deals with the biggest secret in the travel industry, and this is what happened to airfare after you book your flight. Now, no one knows because we never compare prices after we make the reservation. But prices are going up and down all the time, right? So it's very possible that this is the price that you paid, and this is cancellation fees, and between the time that you make the reservation until you fly, the price drops to here, right? So you can actually rebook the same flight at a cheaper price. Refundit is the one that deals with the VAT claims. You know, we all probably have stories about trying to get the VAT back, right? And then there was long line at the custom, or we get to the offices that we are in, should get the money back, and they told us that, but at the store you need to bring a different form on. There are always bad stories, right? So I'm building that in an app that all you have to do is scan the receipt, scan the passport, scan the boarding pass, and get your money back. C3 is in a very different area. This is in an agricultural technology space. And we are building, I would call that an operating system for fruit plantation, right? So imagine that you have a large farm with millions of trees, right? The reality is that today, you don't know what's going on there. What we are doing is we're actually flying with drones over the plantation and doing an analysis on a per tree basis, so we can actually tell you exactly what's going on a single tree level. If this tree is healthy, if this tree has a water stress, if this tree has disease, pests, and so forth. So you can actually take actionable measurement to correct or fix that. And this turns out to be very, very important. By the way, we are starting to engage here in Brazil with citrus plantations, and this is in particular important because of a very specific disease that attacks all the citrus orchards, and so this turns out to be very dramatic. And there are more. I'm building more, and you probably, you know, a year from now, if I will come here again, there will be longer list and more startups, and they're all relevant to all of us because I'm trying to solve real problems. So maybe one more story, and then we can actually have some questions and discussion here. So throughout the Waze journey, I had a lot of people coming to me and telling me their stories, right? So some people told me that I helped them to avoid major traffic jams, and one guy told me that he owes me a lot of money because I saved him a lot of money on speeding tickets and so forth. But I think that one of the best stories that I heard was about a year ago. Someone came to me and said, "Thank you, you saved my marriage." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, because of Waze, we don't argue anymore in the car, so you saved my marriage." So I turned out to be a marriage consultant. But I think I owe the best story to my son. One of my sons, he is 20 years old and he really likes to drive. He would drive everywhere, right? And so one day I asked him to drive me to the airport, right? And he said, "My phone is broken, I can't." And I said, "What do you mean you can't? Here's the car, here are the keys, drive me to the airport." And he said, No, my phone is broken. I don't know how to get there." So I was scratching my head, and then I said, "You know what? I'm gonna be in the car with you. I'll tell you how to get there." And then he asked me, "And how would I come back?" So we lose orientation, but not logic. Thank you.
Uri, can I ask you to join me, I think over here? Or this and this. I think it's good. Akol beseder. Falei tudo bem em hebraico, arrisquei um pouquinho, não falo a língua direito, mas antes de começar a nossa conversa aqui com perguntas do público, de vocês que estão aqui presentes e também de quem enviou perguntas através do aplicativo Mobile Eventos. Eu queria só agradecer em nome do Govtech Brasil a presença de Carla Bertocco, presidente da Sabesp. E é isso, participem enviando perguntas, vocês que estão aí, é só baixar o aplicativo, e vocês que estão em casa assistindo a gente via streaming também. So, Uri, let me open here for the questions sent by the audience. The first one says, nowadays, mobility is one of the major challenges faced by governments, but Waze solved this problem without involving the public sector. What can governments learn from this?
So I think that mobility is critical, right? There will be no future development if we are stuck in traffic. And so mobility is critical. In Waze, even though that made major impact in helping us on a daily basis, did not solve the problem, right? So you ask yourself, is traffic jams today lesser or worser than they were 10 years ago? And they are worse. The problem with mobility is that they're simply, or I would say that differently. You know, when you're stuck in traffic, just imagine how many cars are out there and what's the occupancy of each one of the cars, right? And you'll figure out that the ratio is 1.1 passengers per vehicle. That's the ratio, right? So most of the vehicles are single person. Now, each one of those vehicles is occupying its own space, and then safety distance from the car ahead of us and safety distance from the cars on the side, and we ended up with occupying too much space for a single person. If we do not change this ratio, we are going to be stuck in more severe traffic jams next year and the year after that and so forth. Now, this is the role of the policy makers to change those, right? Because right now we say the roads are free for everyone to use. But what if we change that concept and we basically say, you know what? No, we only allow public transportation in some of the roads, not a single lane, a lot of the roads. Dedicated lanes system, a grid-based dedicated lane system. And this is what we allow. And you ended up with actually getting rid of traffic jams if you're doing that. So this is the role of the policy makers. And there is no one that can figure that out without dedicated lanes, right? Now, if you're gonna build your own dedicated lanes, might be very expensive. But if you enable the existing road system and part of it to become dedicated lane for public transportation, then you'll end up with much better solution. And by the way, the optimal way would be smaller vehicles, higher frequency, rather than large trains or large buses.
Now a question by Renato de Paiva. In countries such as Brazil, many times the entrepreneurship environment is dominated by the economic and educational elites. How to open it to those in the border of society, especially minorities?
I look at the ecosystem for entrepreneurs in Brazil, and while it is improving, it's not good. Right? At the end of the day, you ask yourself, so how many new startups were funded in Brazil last year? And you end up with a numbers that it's similar to the same numbers in Israel, right? Now in Israel, there are 8 million people. In Brazil, there are more than 200 million. So obviously not enough. So the key question is, what can we do differently? And what can we do that will make an impact in the next few years and the generation after that? Generation after that, it's about education. More engineering, by far more engineering. Now, this is very easy to enable, right? All you have to do as a policymaker, if you want to have more engineers, change taxation for them. Give them a bracket for a period of, 5 years after you finish school, you actually have half the taxes to pay half the taxes that you would need. And initially it sounds like doesn't make sense, but you will end up with much more income taxes coming later because you will have so many more engineers. So longer period of time, it's about engineers. Shorter period of time, look, it doesn't make sense for me to invest in Brazil. It does not make sense for me because I will need to pay taxes here and then pay taxes in Israel as well. Whereas the other way around, if you would invest in a startup in Israel, you don't pay taxes in Israel. You only pay taxes where you pay taxes. And so if we don't change, if we don't enable an ecosystem that encourage investors to come in and encourage entrepreneurs to start, and the media will need to help in order to make entrepreneurs heroes for trying, not for being successful, then we don't change the ecosystem. And we need to change the ecosystem. Look, the culture here, or the society, is something that needs to be much better. And we have tons of opportunities. And we need those changes to come not necessarily from the policymakers, but from the entrepreneurs. And so we need to enable more.
I think that's one of the missions here today, right? To
I
inspire
definitely agree.
everyone to try to make a change. Road from YouTube asks, how do you think it's going to be the relationship between people and technology 20 years from now? And I might add, you spoke about our relationship with cars, but in a broader sense, what is coming up next for us?
So some of the things are hard to imagine. Right, but we are looking to see revolutions in the medical spaces that are dramatic. Right, we think of 80 years old people are very, very old, and most people don't survive after the age of 90. But the next generation, age of 100 will be what 75 is today, right? And the generation after that, the age of 120 or 150 will seem reasonable. It's nearly unbelievable to what we will be able to do. And you think about immortality in science fiction, and if each generation is going to last more than one generation beyond that, so more than 25 years, or increase the life expectancy by more than 25 years, then it's starting to look like immortality. It probably will never happen, but living 150 years will make sense. Now this will actually imply different challenges, right? So when are we going to retire if we're going to live until the age of 150, right? Or how much work we are going to make and how much saving we are going to make to enable ourselves to actually survive that long?
Major issues. The next question asks about the connections between Waze and innovation in government services. Are connections related to housing, health, and education, for example?
Waze is probably connected only to mobility, and so is Moveit. And by the way, Moveit does provide data to urban authorities in order to improve mobility, right? And so one of the major things that Moveit is doing is enabling this data for municipalities to do better planning and better urban mobility. Housing is very different. And I'm not sure that we will see major changes there. Now, is housing something that the government should be doing or getting involved or not? Don't know. I think not.
And mentions also, okay, I'll follow up with another question. What are the top requests you have received from public sector to engage in innovation that you reckon? What are the best examples of how government was able to contribute with innovation?
So one of the challenges, and it's not here in Brazil, it's in other places that I face that, is that in many cases, I got the feedback of, we don't want to do anything new, right? And this is a very big challenge when government or authorities don't want to don't want to change anything. Because in many cases, it's a matter of personal preferences of the people that I was speaking with, that they don't want to do anything to change. And this is a challenge, right? If we are not willing to change, then we are actually starting to prevent changes, right? And look, at the time, the wealth of data that Waze has in terms of mobility was dramatic, right? And so we were approaching different municipalities and we told them, look, we can provide you data that is beyond imagination, right? I can tell you how long it's going to take to make a left turn in each and every traffic light in the city, every day of the week, every hour of the day, and you can go and recalibrate the traffic control system. And we were pitching that for a long period of time, and no one cared. No one cared, right? So it's like they don't want to change. And I've seen that in multiple aspects, that that government don't want to change. And then when they do, they want to change in a very inefficient way, and rather than to enable the public sector, they enable major projects with huge budgets that sometimes goes to the wrong places. But the key learning that they have over the years is that what governments don't know is they don't understand users. Right? They understand the problem, they don't understand the perception of the problem of the users, right? So when they ended up with building a solution, that solution is not being used. Because when it comes to usability and thinking about the user experience, this is an area that they're not great at. Governments are pretty good in opening up their access to information. If they're doing that and enabling the private market to go and build the right solutions, then we'll have much better results.
Question from Marina Formighieri. Is monetizing innovation harder than finding a solution?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. I don't even know if, is, let's say, making money with innovation harder than finding a solution?
I believe that if you create value, you will figure out a way to make money, right? If you create a lot of value, you will figure out a way to create a lot of money. Sometimes this will be even a longer journey than actually figuring out how to create value. Because in many cases, you are trying to figure out a very different business model, right? So initially, when Waze was introduced as a free service, then obviously users are not paying. Then the key question is, who does pay? In most cases, users don't pay, businesses do, right? And so the straightforward business model will be around advertisement, but it's not necessarily the only one. So figuring out the right business model might take you a longer period of time. Building a solution, if you have good understanding of the problem and the perception of the problem of the users, then it's probably easier to build a solution.
Uri, I have to add my personal story to your accounts. I'm a big fan of Waze. I think I would even use Waze to go from my room to the bathroom. But there's one problem. You kept me from having the traffic as an excuse from being late. I cannot tell anymore, oh, I was late because the traffic was so bad. Everyone knows how much time I would take from one point to another. So I blame Waze for that.
Look, before Waze, we used to call home and say, okay, we were actually here and home is here, and we used to say, okay, we're already here, right? Yeah, and then later on excuse that there were major traffic jams, right? And so now what we need to tell people is when we call them and say, Waze say that it's going to be, instead of the right time, 10 minutes or 15 minutes later. Right?
Good point. No, I keep WhatsApping my friends when I schedule a meeting or something, and I put ETA, estimated time of arrival, 1:07. It's not even 1:10 anymore. It's funny.
But finding parking will take a longer period of time.
Say that again?
Parking.
Yeah, I have to count on the 3 minutes at least to park. Let me find another question here for you. I didn't read it beforehand, so let's go with the flow. Question from Uirapura. Uber has made a law startup implementing a technology that forces a lot of law changes around the world. Can it be done in other areas like digital identity?
So my grandfather had one job throughout his entire lifetime, right? So he was working from the age of 20 until 65, one job. And the next generation had multiple of them, and I am doing multiple jobs concurrently, right? And the next generation, I don't think that they're going to survive in a single job more than 2 or 3 years. And so what we are figuring out is some of the characteristics of the jobs market that were before are no longer valid. And what we need to teach the next generation is adaptivity, right? So how to faster adapt, how to learn new things, switch to different things, and take the key learning not necessarily as a subject matter expert, but the abstractions of that to the next place, right? Because we are likely to see the same way that maybe Uber creates a wealth of jobs at the same time, they took away some different jobs, right? And we will see Uber as an example for marketplaces, for jobs that can be done on an infrequent basis, right? And we will see more jobs that disappears because we don't need them anymore, right? We mentioned autonomous vehicles that will take away drivers, right? Now, 50 years ago, they used to be drivers for the elevators. And these jobs do not exist anymore, right? And so we are likely to see the pace of changes faster and faster and faster. And what we need to teach the next generation is adaptivity. And if we are unable to adapt ourselves and our job will become irrelevant, then we have a problem. We as society, we need to take care of those people. But as a job, there is no reason to justify a job that does not create new value.
What are your kids studying?
You know, I think...
How did you orient them
I
on
think
that
that
path?
two of them are likely to build startups, maybe three of them. One will go for social work because she believes that this is where she can create more impact. And another one, I'm not sure yet.
But it's all about creating impact, after all.
You know, there is one thing that I teach them. At the end of the day, there is one thing that we want our kids. We want them to be happy, right, in their own ways. And so for me, in order for them to be happy in their own ways, they need to find something that they love and they're good at. That's it, something that they love and they're good at. Because this is where happiness from self-fulfillment will happen. Right?
Thank you, Uri.
Thank you.